And with that, I'm going to introduce Ed Cortas, who is joining us from the Center for Nonprofit Excellence here in Louisville, Kentucky. Ed was on a call last year, and we just loved him so much. We had to have him back, and loved the handouts, loved the presentation and all that good stuff. And I want to say from my heart that I love having a Center for Nonprofit Excellence in town. We are a member, and it is great to be able to tap into a network that can help you with best practices and has just tons of experience and history and can connect you with others, etc. So Ed has over 25 years of development, operational, and management experience in the nonprofit sector. So he's been with CNP for a while, since 2013, has a Master of Nonprofit Administration from the University of Notre Dame. And let's see, I'm going to turn it over to Ed from here. I don't want to take too long with an intro, but appreciate all your expertise. And let's see. Oh, I think Don Blanchard joined us. We will see if he wants to introduce himself as well, but then we'll jump in. How about that? Don, do you want to say hello? Well, we will holler at him later. Don, if you have a question, always pipe up. The session is being recorded, so we can reference it later, and we'll go from here.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be back with you all again. And I have to say, on a Thursday afternoon, to have this many folks taking time out to talk about board governance stuff, that's inspiring to me, for someone who really thinks board governance is a critical piece of nonprofit function, maybe the most critical piece of a nonprofit function. So I admire your interest in this and trying to make your boards better. Unless, of course, you just really didn't have anything better to do this afternoon, which I kind of doubt. So thank you for making the time. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we can just get on with it. Oops. All right. Can you all see that? Good. Thank you. So Jennifer contacted me, it's been months ago, and said, we're really, thinking about how can we think about increasing the commitment of our board members to their task. I wasn't surprised at the topic at all. Building commitment on the board is a project for most boards. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is towards the end of the presentation. But, we're all busy people. We all have a lot to do. And even if we're passionate about something, sometimes it's just really hard to commit. But there are things we can do that will help our boards individually and collectively commit to good governance of our organizations. And that's what I'd like to cover with you today. So at the end of the day, I hope you walk away with, some practicable ideas about building commitment among your board members. And if you're on boards, some ideas about how you can be a more committed member, perhaps. I hope that, I would like, as much as we can make this a discussion for the next 45 minutes or so, the better. So please, I can get going on this stuff. Just flag me down. We're a small enough group. I think you can just unmute and bust in. You know how this goes. I can't see all of you if I'm in presentation mode. So flag me down in one way or another. And you can certainly drop questions, comments, ideas in the chat as well. And I hope also by the end of our time together that you'll look back and say, well, this was worth it. This was worth taking time out of my busy day to share some ideas, to hear some new things, perhaps. Before we launch into this, I want to talk a little bit about board commitment, because I think that's a term that gets bandied around quite a bit. And from my perspective, what it's not a project that your board needs to be engaged in. It's becoming a more committed board, getting board members to be more committed. It's not a project. It's not a goal to be achieved. A commitment to govern and take part in the governance of a nonprofit isn't an end in itself, although we talk about it because it's kind of a problematic thing sometimes. But what we're talking about is not a project your board has to take on. How do we become more committed? What I would submit to you that the commitment really is the result of some solid best practice. And that best practice repeated over time actually builds a culture within your board that leads to commitment and participation. So I would submit to you the board commitment isn't a goal as much as it is a result of good board practice. So what we're going to talk about today is 10 best practices for building your commitment. And I want to label these best practices as opposed to, tips or gimmicks or tricks or the best kept secrets for keeping your board committed. This is solid practice built on experience and study, frankly, how to keep board members committed, boards committed to governance as a whole. And it would be helpful to think of them this way, not just how can I get my board members to be more committed, because it's really going to end up being an organizational effort. So that's the tack I'm taking in my remarks today. So without further ado, what are these 10 best practices? And I would submit to you, first of all, to begin at the beginning, and that's with board recruitment. I'm sure this doesn't happen with the boards that you have been a part of. But with some boards, even boards I've been a part of, it rolls around that, some folks are rolling off the board. There's 2 or 3 empty spaces. Someone, like a month before they leave, says, oh, we have to fill these spaces and get more board members. And someone says, well, who do we know? Well, and then there's a list, and then you kind of call these people and see if you can convince them to join you. I'm sure that does not happen to you. I'm sure your boards are much more sophisticated than that. But I've seen it happen, and we've worked with boards where that's a problem. I would submit to you, board commitment comes with a solid recruitment process. And at the centerpiece of that is actually looking at your board as it is now, and comparing it to what it really needs to be. So if you look at your mission, you say, in order to move this mission forward, we need a board that's composed of these sorts of folks. You assess your board against that right now, identify the gaps, and now you know who you're looking for. And you can start talking about potential people. And then you can approach those folks and say, look, this is what we're looking for. This is how you fit in. This is why we want you to join our board. That's not only a compelling argument to get a solid board member, but then you begin to build the relationship with the board member that can become the basis for commitment. Look, we thought about this, and you are a person that we really, really need. And that begins the conversation in the right place. Then you can talk about commitment. So right on the heels of that conversation then is, okay, but if you join, let's be clear about what you're joining and what our expectations are. Again, this is a conversation that doesn't always happen, that the expectations of a board member tends to be revealed over time in the first year of board service. Oh, I didn't know you expected this of me or that of me. As you're recruiting and throughout a board member's term, to be clear about the expectations, to remind folks about the expectations. How can they be committed to anything if they really don't know what commitment they're making? And if you don't make that clear in the beginning, and as things go along, and there are some surprises, you can imagine how that feels. You've probably seen how that plays off. Oh, I didn't know you were going to require that from me, or that from me. A gap starts to fill, and folks start to pull away. What else don't I know? I better be careful here. There may be expectations here that I can't commit to. And so people start maybe to pull away a little bit. So if you want folks to be committed, be clear about what they're committing to, and very, in no uncertain terms either. I mean, this is how many events. We expect you to make a gift. This is how many board meetings. This is, this is what committee service looks like. This is how often we expect you to show up at our school or our shelter or whatever. if there's other volunteer requirements, be very clear up front. Sometimes folks don't want to lead with that at the beginning for fear that they'll chase people away. It is much better to have at the beginning people who understand and are willing to sign on, rather than folks finding out later and pulling away a little bit. Again, if you have someone, you sit down with someone and you're clear about the expectations, and it discourages them from serving on your board, then it's probably best not to pursue them, because they're not going to be committed. They're not going to be able to live up to what you need them to do as board members. So once you've actually figured out who you need and you've recruited them, you should have a good idea at that point then of what their talents are, right? Why did you want them on the board? What gaps do they fill in? What skills do they bring? What life experiences do they bring? These all should be things you're considering. Once you know that information, it would be really a misuse of your time and their time if you didn't leverage that talent while they're on the board, right? Part of that is requesting, a person with a financial background, perhaps requesting that they serve on a finance committee, or requesting that they take part in the fundraising efforts in a certain way, helping them to understand how you need that and how they could fulfill that need. Part of it is also listening to them and saying, yeah, I'm a finance person and I'm happy to help with that, but what I really am interested in is this part of board service. It happened to me because of my background in nonprofits. I came on a board and I was asked to be on the finance committee. I'm willing to serve there, but what I really wanted, I kind of wanted to be on the governance committee, but no one really asked. I'm still on the board. I'm happy with my service. But if someone feels like what they want to do or they're not leveraging their talents or don't understand how they can contribute from their talents or experience, it's hard to be committed, because it's hard to give of yourself if you don't know how to give it. So that creates another distance. So be clear about why they're on the board, talk to them about how they want to serve, try to come to some agreement about that, and then leverage that going on. The part of this that you don't want to forget about is someone might bring finance background, someone might bring legal background, someone might bring a business background, fundraising. They may know something about the subject matter of the service of your nonprofit. But all of them should be bringing passion. That's the starting point. So as you're thinking about remember, you want to recruit people who get what you do and have a passion to do it, that love what you're doing, and making sure you're feeding that passion throughout too. We'll talk about some ways that can happen a little bit later. But don't forget this: leverage the talent. You went to all the trouble to find them. Now make sure that they can contribute fully and that they can live out this passion. I'm going to stop there for a moment. Any questions, thoughts? We good so far? Okay.
I'm guessing you're coming to this later, Ed, but when you feel like you've been pretty clear about expectations and if they're not being met, that kind of thing.
You have to create an opportunity where that can be brought up to them.
Gotcha.
And we'll talk about that in a little bit.
The come to Jesus talk, that's what I call it.
Well, there's probably a better way to do that.
Awesome. Glad to hear it.
So, and if for some reason I blow past that, please flag me down, Jennifer. Another best practice. How many folks that we have talked to are saying, well, they're not really doing anything. And the more we talk with them, we thought, well, it's really not, because you're really not giving them anything to do. You got to remember, more often than not, probably, your board members have served on or serve on other boards, and what they bring in terms of expectations is based probably more on their own experience of board service than anything else. So they'll come with ideas of what they're supposed to do, which may or may not look like any sort of real commitment, right? Because you don't know what their past experience was. Part of building this commitment then is being clear about what they need to do on the board, give them something to do. And the place that that happens is the committees themselves. So the committees of a board are the workhorses of the board. They are where, typically a smaller group of board members and perhaps other people from outside the board are given tasks, a finance committee or a fundraising committee. A lot of boards have these committees, but they're not clear about what the committees are actually supposed to do. So every committee should have a charter. What are the expectations of this committee? What is it involved in? What should it produce over the course of a year, of the fiscal year? Every committee should develop among its members and submit a work plan for the year based on that charter. That includes providing updates and reports to the board itself, but being clear about what the committee does and what the committee members need to do to make sure the committee does what it's supposed to do. Give folks stuff to do. If they're sitting idly and they don't know what to do, one of two things will happen, and neither of them is good, but predictable. One is they won't do anything, and that looks like a lack of commitment, a lack of engagement. The second thing is they'll find something to do, which may or may not be what's needed, which may or may not be what's wanted or helpful or advance the mission of the organization. Committees abhor a vacuum, so someone will figure out something to do. You may as well direct them and form committees that move the organization strategically forward and help board members understand to construct work plans that they themselves will carry out to advance the mission through their committee. Give them something to do. So that's the sort of head down part, more tasky part, more involved part of board activity. One way to express commitment, but really, in my experience personally, and as I've worked with boards, really the fun stuff and what really taps into folks' passion for the work that you do, the fun stuff a board does is more the broad visioning. What do we want to see in our community for the people we serve? How can we, in creative ways, get those folks to that vision? What can we do differently? What can we do? How can we be innovative? How can we grow our work? What are the strategies to get there? This is the fun part of board work. It's also a critical part too. Certainly, hopefully you have staff and executive directors and CEOs and the like who are visionaries, who are strategic thinkers, who can think broadly and then translate that more into the operational and the day-to-day. Certainly you want that. But vision, strategy, the sort of generative thinking about what the organization does, about what's needed in the community, that is squarely in the purview of the board itself. And give board members the opportunity to do that. So a visioning session at a board retreat once a year, where all you do is sort of talk about what's going on in this community, the people that we serve, what do we want for them within the confines of our mission. Have a generative discussion about that, no holds barred, and give people the opportunity to express their passion for the work and for the mission through this visioning process. Who'd think that a strategic planning process would actually unleash some sort of passion? Usually it unleashes fear and with a measure of boredom for some folks, not for folks like me, but having a long-term strategy that the board has had a significant part of mapping out, sort of the long-term dream for the organization, and then keeping the board and then using that strategy to do the annual work, to report to the board on the progress toward that vision, that long-term vision. that taps into that passion in a different way. It keeps them involved in a different way. Um, and they don't have to be, it's a good counteract to the more nitty gritty committee work. And all of this is around generative thinking, right? How do we think beyond what we usually think about, the way we usually think about these issues and problems that we're trying to solve? Get the board members to lift their gaze. It makes it more rewarding for folks. We really need, as a sector, as an industry, nonprofit industry, if you will, we really need to rethink how we run our board meetings. Again, I'm sure this doesn't happen on your board, but I've been a part of some boards where you show up and a huge chunk of the meeting is given over to reviewing, if not reading verbatim, committee reports or staff reports that were actually in fact submitted to the board in advance of the board meeting with the expectation that folks would read them, but we go over them anyway because really they're probably not going to read them anyway. And I'm sure this doesn't happen on your boards. I'm sure your boards are much better than this, but I've sat through quite a few meetings like this. It's just dead, right? It's just dead. So how do we, if we really want people to engage their passions, to be visionaries, to think strategically, to form their committee work in line with all of that vision, that articulation of the vision, then our board meetings really need to point in that direction, help people along those ways. And so reading committee minutes, trying to solve problems that really are the responsibility of the staff to solve because they're at such an operational level, being down in the weeds, stuff that's very prevalent in board meetings. These are things that we need to replace with the more visionary generative stuff. And the way to think about this is that as your boards are not there to manage the organization. This is a problem because typically we draw our board members from folks in professional life who have some measure of responsibility. Many of them are managers. Some of them run organizations, right? So they get on a board and that's kind of how we think. And so we start to try to manage the organization as opposed to governing it, which is more about vision, strategy, long-term planning, creative use of resources, innovation, and the like, providing the playing field for the operational work. So when we think about our board meetings, are we including in our board meetings opportunities to think generatively? Are we reflecting on overall strategy? Remember, you've got these really smart people, hopefully, with a varied background, hopefully, sitting around your boardroom table, and you want to leverage all of that talent. We just talked about that. Are your meetings actually doing that by providing the space to think generatively? Some of it can be starting off a meeting actually with a question like, if we knew we couldn't fail, what is the one crazy idea we might pursue? And just have board members riff on that for 10 minutes to kind of get the creative juices flowing. There are dozens of other generative questions you could ask, but to start off with, it sets the tone for a meeting that says this isn't going to be about reviewing the work of our staff. It's going to be about how do we govern the organization toward a vision of what we want for our community. The other thing about rethinking the board meetings is inclusion, not just engagement. So, we would be happy if all of our board members, and again, your boards are probably this way, but we would be happy if all of our board members actively engaged in the meetings, but we know that's not true. That's not true at all. There are people who have really great ideas and they want you to hear every single one. And I tend to be that way on a board. And maybe take up a little bit more airtime than the more introspective folks. And we think it's just a matter of getting them engaged in the board itself. They just need to talk more. That's part of it. But there's also the next level above that is this notion of inclusion, which is not just giving you the opportunity to be there, first of all, giving you the opportunity to speak, but actually inviting your ideas, inviting you to share your ideas and making sure those ideas are discussed. This requires a degree of facilitation skill from the board chair to solicit these ideas, make sure they're not ignored, incorporating them into the conversation so that people begin to feel they're not just talking, but they're actually being listened to. They're actually being included in the conversation. They actually feel like they belong on that board along with everybody else. There's been a ton of talk around diversity, equity, and inclusion over the last few years, and it's all been good talk. And for many organizations, that's where it stopped. But how we actually, once we get the people we need sitting around the board table, whether that's people with different skin colors, different sexual orientations, different genders, different backgrounds, socioeconomic levels, whatever it is, once we get our board configured the way we want, the next task is how do we get people beyond engagement, but really included in the conversation? And it takes an intentional piece. And we really have to rethink our board meetings so that happens with intention and not just by accident or just expecting people to talk. And so part of that might be a regular sort of assessment of the board meeting for a couple of minutes. Was everyone heard? Was everyone's ideas valued? That might be part of that sort of assessment. But we have to get out of the read reports, make a few operationally based decisions, mindset, go over the financials in probably more detail than is needed most meetings. Get out of that mindset and get the board more in this governance space where it understands the talent it has around the table, leverages it, and thinks, lifts its gaze to a bigger vision. Any questions so far? Thoughts? All right, I'm going to keep going. Hearing none. Take the opportunity to learn together. It would be great. It goes a long way to commitment, I think, if board members feel like they are actually personally getting something out of this service. They're giving a lot. They're volunteers. They're giving a lot of time, effort. They got the committee work, you got the board meetings, there are probably events that you attend. Maybe they volunteer as well. They're giving a lot to the organization. They're happy to do it because it's their passion. It's the way that they feel like they can contribute to something they really, really believe in. So they're giving a lot. Commitment increases, builds within individuals if they feel like they're getting something back. And one of the ways they can get something back outside of the exercising their passion, which is not to be discounted, is that they feel like they're learning something, they're developing something, they're becoming a better human as a result of the service. And so a best practice is take some time as a board to learn together, right? First of all, learn about the organization. That means a robust orientation process, but reminders throughout board, frequently at board retreats or at board meetings, what the organization is doing, how its programs are fulfilling needs that are identified in the community, beyond just the numbers we might see and the numbers of people served, but really understand what the organization is trying to accomplish at that level, to take some time to learn about that throughout the year. More than that, instruct board members on what the issues are that you're dealing with as an organization. We've got these programs, they're trying to close the gaps, the challenges, the problems, the issues in our community, and this is what those issues look like. This is what's going on with the people we serve. Give people an opportunity to learn more deeply about why the organization even exists, that connects with their passion and gives them a deeper sense, and I think then a deeper commitment to what's trying to be done. Instead of board members trying to figure out how do we get our programs to work better, the question shifts a little bit to that broader visionary question of does what we do change our community? How does it change individual lives in terms of the issues, problems, challenges that those people that we serve are facing? When that's happened to me on board service, when it's almost like questions in my head are getting answered about what we're really trying to do ultimately, beyond program descriptions. Giving people the opportunity to learn, and I find that very fulfilling then, because then my passion, my service is connected to something that's really, really important for the entire community. And it increases my commitment to what we're trying to do on a lot of different levels. So take the opportunity to educate about the organization, the issues, and then I would say to learn about good governance practice as well. As I said earlier, people show up at board meetings with all kinds of board experience, if they have some, or none at all. And then your board kind of becomes this amalgamation of all of those different practices and expectations. It's really helpful to the board, and again, makes a board member feel useful if they understand what governance is and what good governance looks like. So taking time, like sessions like these, an hour of a day, maybe it's a 5-minute best practice of the meeting, best practice of the day at a meeting, where you just talk a little bit about what good governance looks like in a particular area. A lot of folks are afraid to engage, particularly if they're new on a board, or they're new to board service at all. They're afraid to engage because they don't have the confidence that they know what they're doing. That lack of engagement can look like lack of commitment. They probably want to be committed more than they are, but what's holding them back is a fear that they're going to make a mistake, or they're going to look foolish, or they really don't know what they're doing. Educating your board members regularly about what good governance looks like and what that looks like on this board goes a long way to closing that gap. It creates confidence in the individual board members, and that confidence can translate into things like sharing more freely at board meetings, at committee meetings, at the board retreats when you're doing the visioning. And that engagement looks like commitment. It is commitment. Assessing performance. I'm going to attempt to address your question, Jennifer, here. Certainly as a board as a whole, every couple of years doing a board self-assessment, that's a standard best practice. Every 2 years, taking some sort of survey, we administer them at the Center for Nonprofit Excellence, that goes over board best practice and just asks you to fill out a survey about how you think the board is doing in these particular areas. Ours lasts like takes 20 minutes to take, covers 14, 15 areas of board function. You compile those results, you bring them back to the board, and you say, well, the board thinks we're doing well here. Generally, board doesn't think we're doing well here. There is, and then typically there's a commitment to two things. One, to improving where we're not doing well, and two, preserving what we're doing right. That we don't spend all our time on what we're not doing well, that what we're doing right falls by the wayside, right? But some sort of development plan that can go to like a governance committee or the executive committee. Well, we need more education in this area. We need our committee to step up in this area. It gives, like any sort of self-improvement plan, requires a certain amount of commitment. And so laying out an opportunity for that is another opportunity to build commitment. I want to be part of this. I want to be part of making our board better. And so I'm going to commit myself to that. So assessing the performance of the board as a whole, that's also a great way to get in some learning too, because inevitably when we administer these self-assessments, there are some aha moments among sometimes the entire board. I didn't realize we were responsible for that. I didn't realize that was part of our roles and responsibilities. part of our duties. So it can also be an educational piece as well. Um, the other part of assessing performance is actually assessing the performance of the individual board member. Now, this doesn't look like a performance review that you would do with your employee necessarily. It's not so much about sitting down with the job description, although there should be some conversation about how living up to the commitments that the board member made is going. But it's really in its best sort of iteration, in its best sort of representation, is really a casual but intentional conversation between, say, the board chair or a member of the executive committee and the board member, and just go over the past year. Do it at towards the end of the fiscal year, the beginning of the or the board year, however that's measured, and just a conversation, perhaps over coffee, saying, so how is your service? Are we leveraging your talents? Do you feel useful? Are there times you haven't felt plugged in? Can you give us how can we avoid that in the future? Getting feedback from the individual board member, it helps them feel like someone's paying attention and really wants them to be engaged and committed. And you do. You might also discover trends among certain board members or across the board of things that could be better to promote engagement. But it's a conversation about how their board experience has been. Do they feel fulfilled? Do they feel like it's a good use of their time? It is, of course, also an opportunity to say, your commitment, we all made these commitments together, and we notice you haven't been able to attend meetings. You've missed half the meetings this year, and we're just wondering, is this just not the right season for you? Is this just not something you can commit to right now? We're all busy. We certainly wouldn't hold it against you. In that case, I've heard, it's been reported to me anyway, those conversations, usually a question like that is followed by the board member in question, just like a ton of bricks has been lifted from their shoulders. Just say, oh God, I'm glad you said something. I really can't commit to this now. And I know how hard it is to get board members, and I don't want to let you down, but I really don't have the time for this. So part of building a committed board is moving people along who don't have the capacity to make that commitment, whatever it is. A conversation with an individual once a year about how it's going from their perspective and your own can go a long way to assessing, to increasing commitment or letting people move on if they're just not able, for whatever reason, not to commit. Again, it's not a strict performance evaluation like you would do with an employee. It's a good casual conversation, but with some intention behind it. And it shouldn't be any surprise, actually, too. I mean, you should share with your board members, these are coming up, and this is what we're going to be talking about.
Do you see that as a staff role or as a board chair role?
I think it's a board chair role, and because of quite frankly, the political and organizational dynamics in place. So if if it's the board chair or another member, it could, maybe the executive committee divides it up among themselves, so it doesn't. But if a leader on the board is at that peer level with individual board members, so the conversation is more like, this is what we all signed up for, this is what we're all hoping for, how's it going for you? As opposed to an ED or a staff person, where the relationship is different. It's not the same. The staff report to the board, right? So for the board to kind of help assess, the staff person to kind of assess that, frankly, the power dynamic is all wrong. And you don't have that sense of, look, we all said we would do this, and we really need you to step up if that's the conversation that needs to be had. It's just harder to do if you're an ED or a CEO.
Makes sense.
Yeah, you may not be there as a board just yet. That strengthening the role of the board chair, that's another topic. A year from now, if you want to bring up, we can talk about that. Be happy to. Just a couple more here. Oh my gosh, my time's evaporating. take the time to be social. So ostensibly, you've got a group, a dozen or so folks who are passionate about these issues. How often can you walk into a room of people who share that same passion? Building commitment is part of that is knowing who you are with, building trust with them in other ways besides the confines of a board or committee meeting, understanding where they're coming from, a little bit of their background, how they came to this, can all be done in a social gathering. You know, our board before COVID got together quarterly, and with no agenda. All they did was talk, share their lives, share their reflections on the work, typically over adult beverages, some really nice hors d'oeuvres, heavy hors d'oeuvres or whatever, and just took the time to get to know each other on a different level. Sometimes it's hard to commit to something as abstract as an organization, even commit to a movement or an issue. Sometimes that, but commitment to people is something that is much more, what do I want to say, organic, lasting, easier to, what do I want to say, in some ways feels more real and not so abstract. So getting to know each other and trusting one another, sharing your passions, so that when it comes to an argument in the boardroom, and hopefully you'll have a few good ones that are productive, it's about the issue, and it's not based on a distrust or not of the person's commitment or passion or anything like that. Getting together in a social way helps reinforce that. It builds commitment in another way, a commitment to one another to work together. Now, after all of that, I think the thing that's probably most important, particularly these days, is just remember and remind one another and hold one another. We are only human. These are extraordinary times. When you think about where we are with a worldwide, you know, I won't even say we're on the other side of a worldwide pandemic, if only because it just seems to be something we talk about every day. When you look at the internal political situation in our country, whether you're red or blue, when you look at the international tensions, when you look at the environmental issues that we're facing, I mean, just the evidence of it, whatever you believe about its source. The economic uncertainty, not just in our country, but everywhere. And this is playing in the back of our heads all the time. Add on to that commitments for family, our professional commitments in our job and other places. Add on to that the things that we really love and want to do and want to commit to. That's an awful lot. That is an awful lot. And so I think part of commitment is helping people to be committed, and then also understanding when it slips, to cut some slack, to give some grace, and over all of that, express gratitude for what they can bring. It may come to a point where the commitment you need, a person can't give. If we approach this with the sense of, you know, it's not because we don't think you don't love what we do. We just don't think you can commit this time. If we approach it with more from a place of understanding, I think that will help others who can't make the commitment move on. But those who are willing to hang in, or just simply can hang in, have the capacity to hang in with us, demonstrating that understanding, that give and take, giving grace, and thanking them for what they can give, builds commitment on a whole other level. I feel like an auctioneer. Okay, I'm going to stop there and just open it up for questions, comments, additional thoughts. Does any of this resonate? Does anything surprised you? Does anything sound like a crock of butter?
This is Leanna. I'm new to this role and new to boards in general. And our board is currently kind of going through some transition. We have some vacancies and trying to build back up again. And my experience is that it's a bit stuffy and kind of like you said, reading the minutes to everybody and reading everything word for word. I love the idea that you had about adding in the being creative and thinking about different things. And I'm just curious how do I start that with my board and where do I put that on the agenda, because they're very stuck to that. So I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I think, probably the board meeting you have is to a certain extent a result of the culture of your board in general, and cultural change takes time. So I would begin, with just starting to introduce some best practice. Get with if you can get with like your executive committee and just say, for the reasons we talked, we it's been a while since we've done some ideas about how do we become a better board, and start introducing these ideas of governance, of visioning and thinking creatively is really part of our job description. Start to introduce that into your board culture, get people talking about that. And then once that, even getting some commitment around, we really don't spend enough time there. And we can always read committee reports on our own. Then you can start introducing ideas. Well, what would that look like on a regular basis going forward? Maybe we take, when was the last time we went on a retreat together and talked about these things? Can we take a minute? Can we take 15 minutes out of a board meeting, 10 minutes out of a board meeting, just to talk about our vision? You can start introducing those ideas, but it really is a cultural shift. So it's going to take some time. But by first saying, let's do some board education. Oh, part of board responsibilities is this whole generative, innovative, visionary piece. Oh, are we doing that? How can we imagine starting to do that? If we do it this way, what are we going to have to do differently? Oh, we can't read the committee reports anymore. Oh, damn. Whatever. You can start to maybe move that. And if you can get 3 people on your board behind all of that, you don't have to have a majority. 3 people, especially if they're leaders in one way or another, to try to move the board in that way. It'll get you there, but it might take some time. Does that help?
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Sure. Find somebody like me who will go in for an hour and talk about board experiences, or a board self-assessment is a great way actually to sneak that in. Oh, let's just assess how we're doing. And then you can sock them with the, oh, we're not doing this very well. What are we going to do about that thing?
Nice. We have a question in the chat.
Oh, yeah,
actually,
okay.
From Tracy. The fluffy stuff versus the hard talk.
The fluffy stuff versus, I have been on board to spend so much time on the fluffy hard talk to move the organization forward. How do you find a balance? I would like to know, Tracy, what you consider fluffy talk.
So I'm an accountant by trade, so I get
well,
really
upset.
So I just thought I'd start with that, because then you understand where I'm coming from.
Fair enough, thank you.
Yeah, but I've been on a board where it actually was in some serious financial trouble. The organization was, but it was a food co-op, so everyone there was committed to sustainable foods and sustainable farming and sustainable living, which was fantastic, but really wanted to sit around and talk about what farms we had, where I thought that was the executive director's job, and not what are we going to do to make sure this organization stays afloat and stays in business. So that's fluffy versus.
Sure. Well, I think probably that talk that they want to have is appropriate, but deciding if, what room, deciding on how you might want to redecorate the house isn't probably an appropriate conversation if there's a fire, right? So there are times, you can't even lift your gaze unless you are trying to distract yourself from the real issues. But you can't even lift your gaze if there are some real issues in the organization. So you have to get, if there's a financial situation, If the reports are clearly saying that, then it is the board's responsibility, because it's part of the duty of care to get that fixed and to put the and to do that. And in the case of a financial situation, oftentimes that does look very much like very operational in the weeds work, but it's essential, like I say, to give you the platform, a stable, sustainable organization that your dreaming then has possibilities of being actualized. So the fluffy conversations really need to take a back seat if there are real organizational issues that have to be dealt with. Otherwise, it doesn't make it. Not only that, people just won't be creative in those circumstances. I will say, talking about things like vision, mission, and value, organizational values, it's not all unicorn and rainbows. Those have to be very, very clearly understood and articulated and referenced. And in the board holds that in trust with the community, whose resources the nonprofit is working. So these conversations, if all they are is fluff and they're not being tied to the action, then it really is sort of pointless, right? And that was the whole point about having a long-term strategy and having a long-term vision, and the board tracking how we're actually moving to that and what that looks like. If that's done well, that's really hard, non-fluffy work. So does that kind of answer your question a little bit? I just want to look, Jean, we always take 15 minutes of our board meetings for each member to check in about their own organization. Super helpful. We do save it for the last 15 minutes. Okay, that's great. That's great. You get a sense of who's in the room. And then, oh gosh, people have other lives too. Being a startup seems like a great way to get, great way to start strong. Absolutely. Visionaries are the way, I would think, are the way to start. Absolutely. Be clear about that, and be clear about your mission as well. Be clear about your mission. Those statements, what will become those statements, will become touchstones for you. Your values should be a rubric as you make decisions. Does this decision represent our values? Are we living out of our values? Our vision for the community, does it invite other people? Does it help us? Does it help us identify partners? I mean, these are all, they're really important things. Get those right at the beginning. That is not inconsequential work. These aren't marketing devices. These are important touchstones for the work of your board. Any other?
No, we're a little bit past time here, so
I get going on this. I'm sorry.
it's all
I'll stick
good.
along. I'll stick around as long as y'all want to.
Well, I have two quick questions, which
Sure.
is, can we get a copy of the PowerPoint
Absolutely.
and potentially a template for that board assessment survey that you mentioned?
A template for it?
Yes, or something.
I can point you to some resources.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sounds
the survey itself is proprietary. If
Sure.
you want to work with us,
Okay. Yeah.
I'm happy to share that particular survey. I can forward you information about it as well. But there's also some good, if y'all go out to board source. There's some great boardsource.org. There's some great stuff. You don't have to be a member to get a hold of. A lot of the good stuff usually is behind the paywall, right? You have to be a member. I've been trained as one of their consultants, so I can get some stuff that I'd be happy to share with you all
Gotcha.
around.
We do a survey, but I want to compare and.
Sure. Oh, I'm glad you do. I'm glad you do. They are. I'm happy to forward that stuff, Jonathan. What else? Any other thoughts or questions?
Thank you, Jen.
Look here in the chat. Thank you, Jen. It's a great resource.
Very cool.
All right, I hope this was helpful. I hope it gave you some things to think about. Our outcome was you walk away to try some ideas, and I hope that that's been the case. And thank you all again for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Yes, and thank you so much for being here, Ed. Very much appreciate your time. And help with serving our buy local movement. That's what we're all kind of coming together under, although it sounds like a lot of us are involved with all kinds of nonprofits. So it looks like it's going to help us in so many different ways. That's always a good thing.
I'm glad.
Well, thanks for being here, and everyone, want to let you know we have our next local leaders roundtable next month, second Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern, and we'll be jumping into Shop Indie Local season. So Jen Risley will be leading that and giving us lots of resources. So appreciate everyone's time today, and hope to see you next month, and talk to everybody soon.
All right.
Have a great week. Bye.